Hi, everyone. Can we ask you to take your seats? Ambassador Tai is on a tight schedule today, and thank you. Find your tables, everyone. We're going to have time to network at the end of the program. All right, we're going to get going here. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christy Rogers, and I'm Lois Romano, and we are the co-chairs of the Women's Foreign Policy Group. We want to thank you all so much for being here at this annual celebration for women leadership. It's always been a really fun event, and you will meet interesting people and make great connections. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're basically a network of international affairs professionals that are dedicated to advancing women in the field. And we do this through issue programming, mentorship, networking, and our goal simply is to amplify the voices of the young people coming up, of mid-level, because they are our future. And I just want to segue for 1 second. Our founder is here, Patricia Ellis, who had the vision to start this 26 years ago. We are thrilled to welcome diplomats from a variety of countries, and if you will bear with me, I'm going to list them, and if I don't list your country, you are permitted to shout out. All right, Albania, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Organization of American States, Georgia, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Luxembourg, Nigeria, United Kingdom, Uganda, Rwanda, France, Italy, Portugal, Singapore, St. Lucia, Taipei, and Qatar. And we do have representatives, 4 representatives from Ukraine who our executive director will introduce shortly. And we're happy to have you all here today. Don't get comfortable, because in 1 second I'm going to ask you all to stand. We also have a number of retired U.S. ambassadors here, and we thank you all for your service, as well as some senior officials from state and DOD. Can I get all of you to stand for a second, and so we can applaud you? All the diplomats. Come on, there's more of you, I know that. We'd like to also give special recognition to our partners, Northrop Grumman, Principal to Principal, Beacon Global Strategies, Susan Davis International, O'Melveny and Myers, Embassy of the United Arab Emirates, and we want to thank you all for your support and generosity towards the organization. We'd also like to thank all of our board members, who are a good number here today, and our amazing staff, our new executive director, Alexa Chubinski. Did I do that right, Alexa? Jill Benlack, Sky January Barney, who was a student interning for us, and now she is going into the Peace Corps next year. And all of our incredible volunteers. Thank you, and interns. Thank you all very much for being here. Finally, I'd like to thank my co-chair, Christy Rogers, who is going to speak now. She is the consummate professional and a joy to work with. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lois. Welcome all. Thank you so very much for being here. I know there are so many competing interests, especially this time of the year. So the fact that you decided to take an hour, 2 hours out of your day to join us today, I really appreciate it, and you all deserve a round of applause. So thank you very much for being here. And just a note, I may have to put my spectacles on because the computer has aged my eyes. I haven't aged, but the computer has aged my eyes. So I'm just saying, over the course of 2022, even the past couple years, there have been just so many different challenges and crises and disasters. From the horrific war in Ukraine to the continued plight of the people in Afghanistan, particularly the women and girls, to the protests in Iran, sparked by Mahsa Amini's death just 2 short months ago, and other challenges around the world, with violence sparking up in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, over critical minerals, and the plight of the Uyghurs in China. These challenges today show us more than ever that we need to come together and recognize our commonalities, and we need to come together to find solutions. And as Lois mentioned, here at the Women Foreign Policy Group, our mission is to raise awareness to these global challenges, to provide a platform for discussion, for engagement, and to make certain there is a diversity of perspective at the table. That doesn't just mean putting women at the table. However, we all know that when women are at the table, decisions get made, progress tends to happen, and solutions are more than likely forged. But I would also say having diversity of perspective goes beyond gender. It means having different races, different religions, different zip codes, different regions at the table. And today's global challenges require that this diversity of perspective is imperative. And that's what we stand for here at Women Foreign Policy Group. With our current challenges today, like the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, that both seem unfortunately never ending, we've also highlighted, or these challenges have also highlighted, that our global supply chain is being threatened. Our economic security is being threatened because of the vulnerabilities in our global supply chain right now, which is why the Women Foreign Policy Group decided to invite our very own USTR, the United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Katherine Tai, to talk to us today. Each one of you will be able to ask her questions. Well, actually not each. I take that back. We'd be here until next week. So if you have a really important question that you'd like to ask Ambassador Tai, please write your name, your table number, your organization down on the card, and our fantastic Women Foreign Policy Group team will pick it up during the conversation. I have 2 more quick comments I would like to make. One, I keep putting these on and off. It's terrible. I don't know if I need them, if I shouldn't have them. I'd like to thank the fabulous Carol Raspberry and her team at the Fairmont. Everybody, thank you so very much for pulling this off. It's been seamless. We appreciate your help. These things couldn't happen without you. And without further ado, actually, very importantly, I am personally thrilled. Our board at Women Foreign Policy Group is personally thrilled to invite our new executive director officially to the Women Foreign Policy Group and to introduce her, Alexa Chubinski. Alexa, can you join us up here? In keeping with the Women Foreign Policy Group's mission and spirit of celebrating women leaders, Alexa epitomizes that. and we are extraordinarily fortunate to have her with her breadth of experience in international affairs and communications and in media. Most recently, before joining us, Alexa was the inaugural executive director and founder of the Ukraine House Davos. She is also the director of the program on world economy at the Aspen Institute and will continue her work there, which will only help us. So I'm going to turn it over to Alexa, and if you can all give her a rousing round of applause and welcome, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Christy and Lois, for your warm welcome, and thank all of you for being here with us. Having just started in this role last week, I can take no credit for this outstanding event. All gratitude goes to the hardworking WFPG team with whom I am excited to launch, led by Program Manager Jillian Benlack. Jill, please stand. As I call your name, please stand. And Sky January Barney, Jennifer Engel, Eleanor Greenbaum, Brittany Tran, Hannah Kubat, and Serena Pradhan, as well as our volunteers today. Thank you so much. Most sincere appreciation to Lois and Christy and to our board. I am truly honored and humbled to begin this journey leading the Women's Foreign Policy Group at this decisive moment in global affairs, alongside an incredible team of mission-driven doers, as we face geopolitical dynamics existential to the global order that we have largely enjoyed over the past 75 years. We face a clear opportunity and indeed a vital imperative as we contemplate and help shape the future world in which we want to live together, to elevate women's leadership and amplify women's values. A stable, secure, free, prosperous world necessitates female leadership and its commonalities at all levels of influence and decision-making. CNBC's Julia Boorstin, in her newly published and highly researched book, When Women Lead, concludes, among other lessons, that, quote, nothing is more powerful than women helping one another. I am grateful for your trust and very much look forward to what's ahead for this incredible team and community of women supporting women. Thank you. We are honored to have with us today a visiting delegation of women from Ukraine. The ambassador unfortunately could not be with us today. We warmly welcome Katerina Smachli, First Secretary at the Embassy. Please stand. And members of parliament who are also active on the front lines, Ivana Klimpish-Tsinsadze, Maria Ionova, and Irina Herashenko. Welcome. That was perfect timing. They are just arriving in the room. Welcome, Irina and Maria. Today's conversation will be moderated by WFPG board member Elisabeth Bumiller, the Washington bureau chief and an assisting managing editor of the New York Times. Previously, she was the Times' Washington editor and deputy Washington bureau chief. Before that, she covered the Pentagon, the White House, John McCain's 2008 campaign, and New York City Hall, for the Times. She also worked for the Washington Post in Washington, New Delhi, Tokyo, and New York, a truly international career. She has published 3 books, most recently, Condoleezza Rice, An American Life. Welcome, Ms. Bumiller. And now it's my honor to formally welcome our keynote speaker, Ambassador Katherine Tai. As the 19th United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai serves as the principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on U.S. trade policy. She has spent most of her career in public service. She previously served as Chief Trade Counsel and Trade Subcommittee Staff Director for the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress. Over the course of her career, she has played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. trade law, negotiation strategies, and bilateral and multilateral agreements. Welcome, Ambassador Tai. We are honored to have you here with us today. Please feel free to continue eating throughout the conversation. Thank you, and on to you, Ms. Bumiller.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome to everybody here. So there's lots of news on trade. This is a very, very, very topical subject right now. Let me start off with one of our an exclusive by Anna Swanson of the New York Times just yesterday, about what we are calling a green steel club that would levy tariffs on outliers. This came, just to tell everyone here, this came out of your office just this week. And what it is, the Biden administration is suggesting the creation of an international consortium that would promote trade in metals with less carbon emissions, but you would also at the same time impose tariffs on steel and aluminum from China and elsewhere, not part of the Green Club. So this is very interesting development. The question I have is, does this not these are tariffs, and couldn't this also make goods in America more expensive and be a burden to American industry?
So it's delightful to be here with you, Elisabeth, and all of you. And I'm a little bit curious what's for lunch. I'm trying to see, but
Chicken.
it smells delicious from up here. So please continue to enjoy and appreciate this opportunity to connect with all of you. Women in foreign policy, I think I support you and just appreciate all of you doing what you do and being who you are. Thanks to Anna Swanson for a good and fair article yesterday. We agreed with the European Union last year at the end of October that we would take down the tension between us on the steel and aluminum trade. And we would devote ourselves to thinking and putting together our shared values to pursuing a positive vision for trade that would be both fair and contribute to the green and the clean transition. And this is, we're now in the second half of the 2 years that we've given ourselves, and this is our proposal and vision for how we would do that. First, let me focus on the shared values that we have with the European Union on a clean future for our children and our children's children that is supported by our trade rules and our trade as opposed to being undermined by trade. And second, putting ourselves together and appreciating that we are built as open markets and democracies. And taking into account the longstanding struggle that we've had in producing steel in a global market that has been significantly distorted by a massive overbuild in production capacity in other parts of the world. And that is China, but China is not the only one contributing to overcapacity. So the vision that we've put forward is meant to build on this incredibly strong partnership that we have with the European Union to craft a set of rules and create a framework that is going to be able to drive that race to the top, that will leverage the power of our markets combined to ensure that access to our markets is premised on not contributing to the overcapacity that is causing our producers and our workers to struggle to even survive, to be able to continue to compete and produce. And second, to be able to create incentives for cleaner technologies and cleaner industrial output. And in many ways, I have talked about this being one of the most important and significant trade initiatives that we have going on. In many ways, this is President Biden's worker-centered trade policy in action. And I can think of no better partner to be engaged with to prove this concept than the EU.
But my question isn't that also going to, that's it's tariffs on countries like China, other countries. Will that not raise costs for Americans?
Let me put it this way. It's about creating the incentives. It's about creating the incentives for fair trade and clean trade. And I think that what we are working against is a long trajectory of trade policies that have pursued liberalization and cost cutting at the expense of the sustainability of trade and the global economy, to the point where we are in a place today where we are struggling to find the tools to motivate a world that agrees that the climate crisis is one of the most significant existential challenges that we have, and yet is struggling to come up with the economic tools to respond. So, I think that this concept it is actually really important for us to be able to succeed, to fashion a global economy that is going to be sustainable.
Okay, let me move on to China. President Biden has criticized the Trump tariffs of $360 billion worth on Chinese goods as arbitrary and ineffective, and yet he hasn't changed those tariffs. He's kept them. He hasn't lifted them. They were intended to slow the import of cheap Chinese goods into the United States, but Chinese imports have in fact, soared in the last 3 years. In your view, are these tariffs working?
Let's take a couple steps back again and look at the U.S.-China relationship writ large. I think it is one of the most important relationships, maybe the most important relationship in the world. Certainly economically, this relationship has, and how we manage it, has consequences not just for our economy, the Chinese economy, our businesses, our workers, and theirs, but for the entire world economy. So, I think that across the board, President Biden himself and his instruction to his entire administration is to bring a deliberate, thoughtful approach to realigning the U.S.-China relationship across the board, but I'm only responsible for the trade piece. That is going to be deliberate, thoughtful, and focused on a strategic and effective realignment of where our relationship has taken us today. So, I also want to go back to something you said at the beginning, which is, that trade has become this very hot topic. Part of, I think, what the previous years got us used to was a huge adrenaline rush around the policy area of trade. Which is great for me, because there's more dinner conversation, lunch conversation, where people now know more about what I do, especially with respect to tariffs. But I just want to remark, I think we are bringing a holistic, comprehensive approach to China and trade. First, let me start with, tariffs are a tool of trade. For those of us who deal in trade every day, tariffs can be a weapon, and they can be used in sanctions regimes. We certainly have been called up as part of the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Although we're not a leading player in that particular group, we are definitely part of the team. But tariffs are also a tool. They are very often, in my world, a tool for leveling the playing field. Anti-dumping tariffs, countervailing duties. It is about fair competition. And so in terms of the U.S.-China trade relationship, I've given a speech. Tony Blinken's given a speech about the larger relationship. Gina's recently given a speech about economic competitiveness and the areas where commerce plays. You should know that we are very well coordinated across the board. And in terms of the steps that we have taken, the next steps that we will continue to take, including potentially more exclusions, the 4-year review that we have going on, as well as looking at enforcement of rules that we feel that China has not lived up to, all of those are an important part of taking us to a place where our relationship with China and our ability to compete put us in a stronger position and brings more stability to this profoundly consequential relationship.
Others are saying that the Biden administration is taking the United States into a new Cold War with China, a trade Cold War. And do you agree with that?
I mean, if it's others who are saying it, you're suggesting you're not saying it.
Well,
we should
it's
perhaps
the journal.
invite, we should invite,
It's
perhaps
the
invite others
journalistic.
from our...
It's the journalistic, sleight of hand. Others are saying, but others are saying.
That's
it.
very refreshing. Okay.
You
Yes.
know.
No. I know who's saying it.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do is tease out a little bit, which parts. It is a profoundly consequential relationship, economically and with respect to trade, that is also deeply complicated, and it feels like the issues in the global economy just keep getting more and more complicated. It's not as though every month that goes by, you feel like, oh, the complications are resolving themselves and going away. They're just layers of complication. So I don't think that's the goal. Let me put that very clearly. The goal is not to recreate a Cold War with the second largest economy and growing. The goal really is for this realignment where we can continue to compete. We can safeguard the openness of our economy, the freedoms that we have within our society, and be able to continue to press China in all the ways in which we would like for its economy and its system in general to be more compatible with ours. But we are at the point, and I think this goes across our experience, across administrations, we are at the point where I think that, we've talked about it as turning the page on the playbook. And, while not letting up on, the communication with China in terms of these are all the things we wish you would do differently and where we think that it would be in your interest to do things differently, where we need to start taking action to do things differently unless and until there are changes on the other side.
Well, I'm just curious, you obviously talk to your Chinese counterparts a great deal. What is it, how are they to deal with one-on-one?
Oh, I have a lot of respect for my counterparts in China. This is my second stint at USTR, and I grew up at USTR and when I was here earlier in my career as a trade litigator, WTO litigator. And the second half of my time, over the 7 years I was there, my focus was exclusively on bringing cases against China at the WTO. And you would think that through that experience, I might have developed, a lot of hostility towards China. The experience is actually the opposite. Through that experience across the litigation table, I developed a great deal of respect for the professionalism and just the smarts of my counterparts from Beijing. And I think that this second time that I've come back, my interlocutor has been the Vice Premier, Liu He, who is in charge of the economic portfolio. I have now had a chance to meet with the Minister of Commerce, who went to Bangkok for APEC for the first time in an in-person meeting because of COVID restrictions over these past couple years. They really know their stuff. And I think that, what I read back is they are also fully appreciate the profound consequence of this relationship. That doesn't make the issues easier, but I would say that going into 2023, one of the things I hope for is more opportunities to meet in person, because that's really not been on the table these last 2 years, primarily because of restrictions on the Chinese side, to create that connectivity on a person-to-person level, to be able to have those difficult conversations, to be able to guide us through this process of realignment.
Let me go back to the EU again. They are pretty unhappy with the United States over the Inflation Reduction Act.
I hadn't noticed, but I'm glad you're letting me know.
And they say that, incentivizing the production of cars in the United States North America, by offering tax credits here for cars assembled here, is basically discriminating against foreign car makers, including those from our close allies, France, Germany, obviously. They are demanding that the U.S. come up with some kind of a solution. So are you considering, the administration, a policy change or an executive order of some kind to make them less unhappy?
So on this entire issue, a couple things. One is we are taking very seriously Europe's concerns, and you heard the big boss say it himself last week when President Macron was here. Right. President Biden made that very clear. But we also, and we know that leadership on the European side has also taken pains to make clear that fundamentally, when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, our partners in Europe also recognize we are extremely proud of the Inflation Reduction Act. It is the most significant investment that certainly we have ever made in a clean energy, clean future. It might be, but I haven't run the facts on this. It might be the biggest single investment that anyone has made. And again, this is an area where we have an entirely shared set of values and vision with the European Union. On the parts of the Inflation Reduction Act that have given rise to the serious concerns that we are hearing from our partners in Brussels, in Paris, Berlin, and across the board, you've also heard our commitment to addressing those concerns. And so that was President Biden's instruction to his entire team. And those of us who have pieces of the problem and have been tasked with coming up with pieces of the solution.
But to answer my question, is there an executive order under consideration? Or
Do you think there should be one? Because
I'm asking you.
Because this is, it's a whole of government process. Treasury's got a piece. We've got a piece. The economic agencies are all engaged. Mm-hmm. And President Biden and President von der Leyen tasked two very trusted advisors to lead the task force. So the task force for addressing this is coming out of the NSC and President von der Leyen's cabinet. I can share with you the level of partnership coming from the agencies feeding into the NSC task force process. It is seldom that you see that much of a smooth interagency commitment and interaction.
Thank you. So let me move on. You recently said that or you've had said that all recent trade deals have been destructive, which is the first time that any Democratic administration has in effect repudiated all trade deals that have won bipartisan support in Congress, including NAFTA, and establishing normal trade relations with China. Now, those measures were supported by President Clinton and President Biden when he was in the Senate. So does the president now agree with you that these votes were a mistake? I mean, the bigger question is, how has the Democratic Party changed on trade, basically, since NAFTA?
So I think to attribute to me the statement that all previous trade deals were destructive is a caricature.
Recent trade deals.
Even recent trade deals. It is a very complicated, we live in a complicated world, and I don't tend to speak in absolutisms like that. So let me skip that. Thank you. I know I can sometimes be a bogeyman for folks who wish for simpler times, but I really try to be fair. I'm hardwired to try to be fair. On your question about whether or not the Democratic Party has shifted on trade since President Clinton, I recently had a couple projects where I asked my teams to dig into our archival records and to look at, why parts of our trade practice and global trade look the way they do. And, a lot happened in the 1990s. NAFTA, the WTO, they're kind of brothers, or sisters, siblings. One went into force 94, 95. It was all part of a really globalizing movement, a particular one. Something that I think doesn't get enough attention, and I really mean this to the credit of President Clinton and his administration was the degree to which the Clinton administration leaned into bringing the interest of workers and the environment to try to incorporate that into the conversation around world trade. So, I think that what happened in Seattle happened, as a result of that desire to get world trade to talk about workers and the resistance that was there. Even in the NAFTA, I know that, the labor and the environment side agreements have been heavily criticized by Democrats, by our core constituencies, the workers and the environmental organizations, for not having teeth. But they were in that agreement, they were riding alongside that agreement because of a recognition, even then in the 1990s, that these are critical components of our trade and competition that have to be a part of the conversation. So, I think that in terms of where we are now, a lot of it is seeing the chickens coming home to roost. Our doubling down, frankly, on our democratic roots and values, that global economic policy is foreign policy adjacent, but we are also adjacent. We are also not just adjacent, we sit at the intersection of foreign policy and domestic economic policy. And we have to carry with us the significant responsibility that what we do in global economic trade negotiations impacts our people and the environment that we live in.
Well, the sense that global trade, that NAFTA didn't lift all boats. That is where this comes from, correct?
So I think that just if you look around us, and this is something that comes up quite a bit right now in my conversations with, frankly, all of my counterparts, this focus and this anxiety about inclusivity, that what we do from here on out, we have to be focused on inclusivity, because this version of globalization, and to be fair, there have been many, many versions of globalization in human history. This particular version has been very powerful and has created some extremely powerful winners. But it has really been lacking in certain ways. It certainly has put us in a position where we're having to really focus on how to turn this into a sustainable engagement going forward. But also that there are those that we have left behind. And when you add COVID on top of it, you see that COVID's had disparate impacts on different sectors of our economy and society. It has had disparate impacts on different economies. I have a grave anxiety, and everybody who has a job like mine shares it, that there are pandemic winners, and there are people that the pandemic is leaving further behind. What can we do in trade? What can we do differently? How can we think differently? How can we work together differently to craft a new version of globalization that is going to be more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient?
Was that the impetus behind the report you recently commissioned on how trade has affected people depending on their race, gender, sexual orientation, or disabilities, and that people of color have been disproportionately hurt by trade, by the disruptions caused by the pandemic? Yeah.
100%. I think that, this is one of the things I value most about my experience working for Congress and in the House in particular, is, getting to know America through the representatives that they send to Washington, encountering the very different perspectives on trade, given the impacts of trade and other phenomena on those constituencies, and understanding that the impacts of trade have been very, very uneven. I asked the U.S. International Trade Commission to bring the rigor and discipline that they are known for to helping us to answer these questions and to document what the impacts of trade have been, because we've not done that. We've not done that as a government. I know that there are organizations, there are think tanks that have tried to do it. That question has never been asked in a serious way. And it's true, we didn't know what the answer would be. But I still feel confident, I felt confident at the time that whatever the answers were, we needed to be prepared to take that information in order to inform us how to do trade policy better. Because I'm convinced that we can do it better, and that if you demonstrate the flexibility and the willingness to do it differently in pursuit of better outcomes, you can get those who have even felt like trade was inimical to their interests to come to the table to contribute to crafting a new set of rules.
Thank you. Now, thank you. I'm now going to open this up to questions from the audience in the time we have left. So we have people with microphones, so raise your hand if you have a question. I can't see out and myself, so okay, great. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivana Klimpushtin-Sadze. I'm Ukrainian member of the parliament. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here with you. and before asking my question, let me use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you and all the people of the United States and of all those nations that are backing Ukraine up today, because we are definitely in the forefront and trying to keep freedom, and from our success, I think a lot depends also in the trade, also in the security, in our well-being for the future. So we hope that you are not going to get tired of supporting, because we are not going to get tired of fighting. It's existential for us, but it's definitely also very, very critical for all of you. Thank you. With regard to the question, what else can we do together in order, beyond the sanctions, beyond the security export controls, what can we do together in order to limit the possibilities of Russia's economy, in order to put additional fiscal pressure on Russian Federation, so to deny them of this ability to continuously run this horrific genocidal war against Ukrainian people? That's first part of the question. And also, what kind of limitations we can take off the table for Ukrainian imports? Because irrespectively of the war that we are fighting at this particular moment, we still have 70% of our economy that is trying to survive and trying to work. So how can we open up here in the US for Ukrainian imports? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to commend you on your courage and your heart. It is very well highlighted on the world stage from your president on down. I've had multiple chances to meet with your Deputy Prime Minister. She's been in charge of trade, and I know how hard it is for all of you to travel even, you know. I hope that here you are feeling the love. We are very, very committed to your success. On the first question you asked about what more can we do, I just want you to know that if you were looking for a job in our White House, there is a place for you, because that is actually the question that we are constantly asking ourselves inside the administration, and there is very, very strong partnership with the Congress as well, as you know. I mentioned earlier that in terms of, you know, the sanctions program, USTR is a team player on this. We get called up, in particular with respect to tariffs, but the more powerful tools, our treasury tools, the sanctions tools, the export controls, or at commerce, you know, we want to stay very tightly knit up. Sometimes I even wonder, you know, where tariffs are one of our primary tools. You know, as I guess the little sister or the sibling in this grouping, how useful are we if we're going to dial up the tariffs on, you know, certain Russian imports? At what point should you just impose a ban? You know, if you're going to try to make it more expensive, at what point of expensive are you actually hurting the other side? So, we are an important part of the team, but again, I think that, in terms of really creating hurt, some of my partners have much more effective tools, and we're also trying to innovate in this area. In terms of what more we can do, let me just take 3 steps back, because at USTR, there are a couple things that we do very, very well. And because we are small, we're quite small. We're about 250 right now at full strength. We're closer to 300. We have to know what our core competencies are in order to be effective. And we try not to sign up for things that we know that we're not good at. We are hardwired as negotiators and enforcers. And I say that not to say that these are 2 separate activities, but that, it's on a spectrum, and we do negotiations and enforcement all the time, and oftentimes enforcement comes through negotiations. One of the really profound consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that it has struck at the core something that we really didn't think was supposed to happen in this version of globalization, which is, I know it wasn't a hard and fast rule, but that, the theory for, just full trade liberalization with the entire world was that the more that we traded with each other, the more prosperity we would create, and that this would be, if not a guarantor, that, it would go a long way to guaranteeing peace also. And what's very, very clear, and I think it's shaking all of us, is that, Vladimir Putin's decision to march across the border and to take those very aggressive actions, which are happening every single day, is not an economically rational decision. And it has shrunk the pie for Russia. Their GDP, last I checked, which was maybe a month and a half ago, their GDP this year has shrunk by 3%. It did not just shrink the pie for Ukraine, where Ukraine is also suffering significant human impacts, but it's shrunk the pie for all of us. The energy crisis, the food insecurity, these are all inputs into everything around us every day, and us and our families. All of this is attributable to a non-economically rational decision. So it's something that we're grappling with, and certainly at USTR, I think that we are trying to figure out how this feeds into our thinking around articulating and working with others around a positive vision for a new version of globalization that takes into account that we are still human beings, but that allows us to build a more sustainable, resilient, inclusive future. And certainly the experience that we are having here is informing every day the thinking and the decisions that we're making.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tai. My name is Mathilde. I'm Ambassador of Rwanda to the United States. And I'm speaking on behalf of the whole continent of Africa. As you probably know, even though there hasn't been much media about what is going to happen next week, we have more than 40 heads of states coming to Washington. And they are coming with expectations that we are going to have true partnership with the United States when it comes to trade, it comes to many different things. This is a meeting that comes after 8 years. It was under the Obama administration that the head of states from Africa came to the United States. And quite frankly, I have to say that Africa has been always lagging when it comes to interest and trade. And I would like to ask 2 questions. One is, how are you going to do better? I know that your office especially is going to be interacting with Africa. We are talking about AGOA. And AGOA has been one of the biggest programs for Africa, but it has been underutilized for the most part. Yeah. And because of the conditionality of AGOA and many different things. I can give you an example, like my country at one point, when we decided to do industrialization and promote our own trade, I mean our own production of materials, were penalized because we kind of faded out the second-hand clothes. And it was a very bad punishment when it came to that. So many countries, they have seen that happening. And the next week we are discussing about AGOA. Our ministers of trade are coming to the United States just to discuss this. But also we are going to be talking about direct investment. Of course, we have heard many things saying that sometimes it's not easy to invest in Africa and many different things. But also you have heard about what Africa has done, especially doing the continental free trade. That is now in actuality in operation. So can you, maybe in a few words, tell me how we are really going to have a true partnership with Africa? That is beyond what we have seen in the past. And then, and what we can tell our presidents when they come here, what are they going to see? Is it again going to be a photo op, and they go back and you go back to what was used to be? Because again, coming back to China, I have to say, and I never like to complain, but sometimes we are seen as a proxy place among superpowers more than really focusing on this. Even when you look at how that event, bringing more than 40 heads of states, has been covered in the media in Washington, it can tell you a lot more than what I can say when I'm standing here. So I thank you very much for your edifying presentation. And I like to thank again the Foreign Policy Group because you have done amazing programs, and always thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to meet you, Ambassador, and I hesitate to ask you how many words I'm allowed to respond, and if I get one tweet or two tweets worth of words. But I could go on for quite a while, and I take that as an indication that I should try to be succinct. I actually just did an event hosted by the Atlantic Council with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretary General Mene last Friday, and a number of these themes came up. Yes, I am actually really, really excited by the Leaders Summit that is happening next week, and I will be hosting a ministerial with the trade ministers focused on AGOA. I think to your point about looking for true partnership, that is also what I'm looking for. And on the topic of AGOA, what I've asked the trade ministers to be prepared to engage on is precisely the point that you raised, which is we all know that AGOA is a really important trade platform, trade program that we, the United States, have with the entire continent, but that it is consistently underutilized in terms of how much of the opportunities actually realized as real gain for our trading partners. I have no doubt that for a lot of our traders, a lot of the potential is realized. But our preference programs are intended to benefit and stimulate growth and, yes, investment in our partner countries. And I think that across the board, but especially for AGOA, we struggle with how to translate the opportunity that we know is there in concept and, on the page in the statute into actual practice. So I am inviting a full-on two-way or, 40 to 50-way conversation about our partners' experience with AGOA, where the challenges are to realizing that potential, and how, as we come upon the tail end of this period of authorization for AGOA, how we should be thinking about what comes next. If there is to be another version of AGOA, again, how can we have a better version of AGOA? Secretary General Mene has made this point very clear to me, and I completely agree with him. When AGOA was reauthorized last time, it was 2015, the AFCFTA hadn't fully come together yet. Now it has. So how do we think about AGOA in light of the AFCFTA and the work that is ahead on implementation for African continental integration? I am really, really bullish on the U.S. partnership with Africa. We have strong historical, personal ties that make this relationship valuable in and of itself. I know that every time I talk about trade with Africa, the issue of China comes up. I'm never the person to raise it because that is not the reason for us to engage Africa. We need to be leaning into building this partnership, and the China piece is there undeniably, but it isn't that different for Africa as it is in the rest of the world, where just the Chinese competitive economic engine is something that we have to contend with and that we need to work with others to respond to. Ambassador, I have a lot more to say. You actually limited me to just a little bit, but I just want to let you know how important of a priority this is for me.
Okay. Let's do, thank you. The ambassador has a hard stop, so let's do one more question. Okay. Milan. Hello, Milan.
It's coming to you.
Okay.
So I just want to marry together what you said about inclusion and opportunity, as well as the Rwandan ambassador's comments about AGOA. We have tried, when I was in the State Department, and it continues, to really enable women to benefit from trade, which is really, we're still on the margins in a huge way in terms of growing markets, in terms of successful entrepreneurship. What more can we do? We learned working on AGOA that women hardly knew about AGOA. They didn't know how to benefit from it. The same thing in working on APEC. We had to put those issues on the APEC agenda. But it seems we're still not where we need to be if women are going to be able to grow their own businesses, whether in the United States or overseas.
That's great. You're right. In some ways, this is low-hanging fruit because, everybody's got women. And, this is one of the brilliant parts of a group like this, Women in Foreign Policy. I'll just start with one note, and I'll come back to directly answering your question. Whenever I'm on travel and I meet a counterpart who's a woman, there's an automatic kind of recognition and an appreciation for each other. And I think you'll know what I mean, which is that everything is harder. Every step is steeper. It's just a fact. And, I don't lead with that, but it's a thing where you look at each other, and even if it's in passing in the hallway, you kind of look at each other and kind of say, like, you go. I don't know you. I don't even know if you're going to like me, but, we have a recognition that, you've had to work really hard. You've had to be extra talented to get to where you are. In terms of unlocking the potential of women in an economy, I want to give the late Prime Minister Abe in Japan a huge lift up here. When Prime Minister Abe unfurled his Abenomics plan, there was a plank of it that was dedicated to the concept of womenomics. And this was just 2014, I think, or 2015. And I remember being in a briefing when I was a Hill staffer by the Japanese embassy, where they were, describing the 3 arrows of Abenomics, and they got to the womenomics piece, and it was at least 1 or 2 parts of the PowerPoint presentation. And I remember at the beginning just thinking, what is this? But to have them lay it out in economic terms, this is about growth by unleashing the participation of women in our economy. I thought, well, that's just universal. We all have untapped potential in our women, in our economies. It is today in 2022 a much larger part of and a much more mainstream part of the conversation that we're having at the WTO, in APEC, in a lot of these different forums, even in our bilateral conversations. I think that the task for us next is to figure out how to translate the desire for unlocking this potential into, well, what are the actual mechanisms? At the risk of going somewhere where I don't go because I try to stay in my lane, I would say that just in the past months, when I engage with our international partners on this issue of unlocking the potential for women to drive growth in our economies and to drive us into the next phase of global economic growth, I carry with me a very heavy sense of self-awareness that here in the United States, something has happened in this last year that has a significant negative impact on the ability of women to participate in our economy. And that makes those conversations harder because everybody knows what's happened here. But I think that, there's also an economic argument here that I don't lead with, but that is very much on our minds. It's not just about trade tools, but when you talk about unlocking the inclusiveness in our economic arrangements, there are a lot of other non-trade and sometimes what appear to be non-economic policies and barriers that we have to contend with.
Thank you. Ambassador Tai, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Please feel free to stay, have your dessert, network, talk to each other, and I have asked the board members to meet out in the lobby for a very quick photo with the ambassador. Thank you. It was great to meet you.